Welcome everyone to the BPHASA and the ARC Michigan Person-Centered Planning webinar series. We will be starting today's webinar in just a few moments. Just a reminder, your videos and mics are turned off. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. Any questions not answered live will receive an email follow-up. Later this week, all participants and our attendees will receive an email with a link to the recording. The ARC Michigan Person-Centered Planning Quality Improvement Project website will also be updated later this week, where you will be able to find the recording of today's webinar and recordings of other webinars in this series. I will also include a link to that webpage in the follow-up email with a PDF of today's presentation. We will be starting in just a moment at 3 o'clock. We'll give everyone about 1 more minute to get logged in. All right, it is 3 o'clock, so I think we are ready to get started. I'm going to stop my share and let Sheldon take it from here. Sheldon, if you're there.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I just couldn't get to the right screen. So I'm here. No need to panic, Heather. No need to panic. I promise. Hang on 1 second. I'm going to get into the presentation here. How is that looking for everyone?
Looks good.
All right. I know I got some feedback last time, but I really prefer to be able to see my slides. So I'm going to leave it like this. See if I can adjust the screen a little bit, tighten it up a little bit here for people. There we go. So my name is Sheldon Schwitek. I am long-standing member of person-centered planning, kind of right from the beginning. I'll do a little bit of an introduction for myself in a little bit, but just to remind people, we're here kind of as a continuing series of presentations on person-centered planning and actually what it means for the work that we're doing and what it kind of looks like historically. And today we're actually going to be talking about some of the tools that we use and some of the tools that we now have access to around and deepening our thinking about what good person-centered planning and practices look like. I'm actually going to turn off my video as well, just because I find that it just is a distraction for me more than anything else. And you all can focus on the slide presentation at hand. So those of you who have been to some of my other presentations know I actually really like to start with a poem. So I'd actually like to start with one written by a woman by the name of Rosemary Watola Tromer, who I found on the internet through a friend of mine. And she actually sends out a poem a day. And this one came through kind of right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I thought it really resonated for some of the work that we're doing, especially when we're thinking about planning. So this poem's called "It Might Just Happen." Everywhere I go, I find them. People who bring love to the world. Reading the headlines, I sometimes think love is dead and humans are brutes. But and we may as well all give up. But every time I leave home, I meet pedestrians who wave and women who give understanding nods and men who offer to pay when the person in front of them is short a few bucks. People hold doors for each other with a smile, and I've seen folks pick up trash off the sidewalk and go out of their way to not step on a beetle or a worm. My friend Wayne says, we have to love the world to want to save it. And sometimes I think it just might happen, though every day unspeakable cruelty happens on these same streets. Oh, this world. Even as I feel my guard go up. I see strangers chatting on the corner as they wait for the bus. Notice how their laughter threads through the noise of the day, like a song, like a kite. So just a little bit about me. Really, I understand now, looking back a number of years later, that I was really influenced by the work that I do because of my youngest brother, Ryan, who has a slight intellectual impairment, and a family who actually managed to make sure that he was fully included in school, and that he graduated from school, and the expectations were that he would have a life like anybody else. I don't know that my family really planned it per se, and maybe that would be different now that I have the experience I have, and am certainly working on helping support him as the rest of my family ages. But that his slight intellectual impairment didn't get in the way of my family really having expectations for him to have a life like you or I. And that, I think, has really influenced my thinking about what is possible for people who experience disability. For about a third of my career, I actually provided direct supports to people. This is actually my friend Walter and I at a group home that I worked at in Kalamazoo, probably not long after the recession in the early 2010s. And it's kind of where I got introduced to the Center for Positive Living Supports and became a trainer in culture of gentleness and gentle teaching. And then continued to sort of build on that. I've done some consulting. I actually still continue to do consulting here under my my partnership with my friend Shelley with respect to In the Company of Others, which I think you saw the logo behind me when we first started. And now I'm actually working for a supports brokerage organization in New Jersey doing planning for people across the board. So, but I think that ultimately, I think it's actually my work with families that's been the most important to me, and some of the most important work I've done. We actually are here to think about person-centered planning, and I think there's this very sweet video by Beth Mount through Open Futures Learning that I think gets at some of the things that I think we're trying to address in New Jersey at EROS around supports brokerage, but also about planning in general, and how planning is actually, I think, BP planning as opposed to service provision. And I think Beth does a really nice job in this particular video to describe the differences and what we might be possible for people.
From the origin of person-centered planning, we were trying to understand and see what it looks like when we just fit people into systems and defined their needs and saw them through the eyes of what a system needs for a person to be in order to generate the funding that's required and to basically service them. And system-centered work tends to be based on a medical model which assumes something's wrong with people, and it's the system's job to fix them. And so the system is invested in defining them in terms of their deficiencies and creating a treatment plan, and then working to help people get it right before they get to be members and be whole people in the real world. So person-centered planning offers a major contrast to that, which is to say that people don't belong to systems. They belong to themselves, they belong to their families and their communities. And if we see them in a different light by the capacities that they bring, and we understand that their communities are the place where they can contribute and be citizens, then our thinking shifts dramatically from how to fit people into systems and service them there to how do we support people to live good lives in community, and then how do we take what we need from systems and services so that services are not bad, they just tend to be wired for their own purposes, for their own self-interest. So a good person-centered planning process calls into question the way we use services and invites us to really change the way most of our services are configured to be more responsive to the people and the way that they want to live in the communities that they're in.
Contact us for more information, for a free demonstration or trial, or to sign up.
So this idea that person-centered planning is something that is an adjunct to the services that we provide, but that it's actually looking at getting people more connected to communities. I think Beth Mount, along with a number of forward thinkers, and we're going to touch on them today again, kind of expand on some of the things we talked about last week in the presentation around this idea of person-centered planning and thinking. And dive into some of those tools a little bit deeper. I'd actually like to start because I think that that conversation about what the system can do to support people and what big P planning, as I like to call it, is able to do for people are really interconnected in ways, but that we as planners and even as service providers have an obligation to help people understand what it is that we're doing and how it's impacting the possibilities for people to have big, full, rich lives. And the 5 valued experiences and the 5 accomplishments are something that John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien have been thinking about. And I shared a little bit of this last month at the webinar, but I'd like to add it again today. Is this idea that there's sort of these 2 places where the 5 valued experiences and the 5 accomplishments meet in ways that allow us to think about not only what service provision and what outcomes we're looking for, but also an opportunity to think about how is it that we are making sure or ensuring that people have bigger lives. And so if we think about the 5 valued experiences, and we talked about this last month, is that these experiences are sort of at the heart of a good life for all of us, right? This idea of belonging, of being able to choose in our own lives, where we can make a contribution, where we're actually respected, and that we get to be and share ordinary places with other community members are at the core of planning and good planning for people, is that we take this into consideration. The 5 accomplishments, I think, are really the goals that we in service provision, but I think goals that we have for ourselves and people that we support are also critical, right? That we want people to have a sense of autonomy, or we want to have autonomy for ourselves. We want places where we can participate in community, where we actually have a valued social role. And that really goes back to the beginnings of person-centered work and Wolfensberger around this idea of social role valorization, right? That people have a valued social role in their lives, that they have a presence in their community, that they can show up and be welcomed, and that they have a level of competency and whatever that might look like for each of them. But that intersection, I think, is the piece that's most interesting to me. This idea that if we are working towards people having a sense of autonomy and being in control of their lives, then we actually really need to foster the accomplishments of being able to choose and choose wisely, and that they actually feel like they belong. And so each of these accomplishments is really connected to, at some level, where we are and the valued experiences that we want people to have. So if you're really good at choosing, you have a sense of autonomy and being able to make choices, but you also have a level of competency to be able to make that happen. This idea that contribution is a really important one as well, because we all want to make a contribution in our lives. Even our work, many of us are invested pretty heavily in our own work, and we want to make a contribution through our work or through other places that we participate, right? So if we want to make a contribution, we actually have to have a presence in community, whatever that might be, and that we actually have to have a level of competency at something. So I also think about this idea of sharing ordinary places, right? You have to be in the community, and you actually have to be valued by the people around you. I could spend a whole webinar just talking about the 5 valued experiences and the ways I think we can embed it in our work. For me, it is a really nice sort of touchstone to think about what are the goals that we have for people, and then how do those actually fit into, or how do we think about the goals that people might have for themselves, and then what are we doing to support that? What are the accomplishments for us to be able to make that happen? We want people to have valued roles, and we need to think about what it is that we do to make that happen. So if people are being respected, we know that they have to be participating in community, and that people have to value them showing up at the end of the day. I know I kind of dove right into this presentation, but as Heather said, feel free to use the Q&A at any point in time. I am a far more interactive webinar presenter than I am a talking at the screen or talking head at the front of the room. So if there's anything that comes up along the way, or people want clarification, or if they have a bit of a story they want to share in some way, shape, or form, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A. So this idea of person-centered planning really grew out of a way of thinking about people, but also about some tools that would help us to get more focused on who the person is and what that would look like for them in their community. So we last week talked about both MAPS and PATH as two of the sort of underlying or beginning ways of thinking about person-centered planning, developed by Jack Pierpoint, Marcia Forrest, John O'Brien, and a number of other people, as ways to be able to help people share their story and to dream really big for people. These tools are a little complex if you're not familiar with them. I just did a workshop for SWEMBA in Michigan, a 3-day, we call it a creative facilitators workshop, because we actually are asking people to be creative in the ways in which they're facilitating those conversations. MAPS and PATH are actually a graphically facilitated process, and traditionally that requires 2 skilled facilitators, one who does some graphic recording and someone else who does some process facilitation. Now, that's not to say that these tools don't have something to offer, and that they couldn't be in some way facilitated by one person. But I think to be effective, we need to remember that some training needs to be happening for people, and that 2-person facilitation can be pretty important to be able to hold space for what becomes a pretty big planning process. The other thing to remember about those 2 tools is that it's usually utilized to assist in developing a circle of support or a personal support network for people, and that it requires a particular block of time. I don't think I've ever participated in a MAP or a PATH that didn't go for 2.5 to 3 hours. So it's a pretty big time commitment, and it usually includes the person and a lot of the people in their life that they're connected to, whether it be within service land or if it's people that they're connected to in their communities. One of the ways that we often help people do that is we actually get them to think about this relationship circles. And this has been around for a very, very long time in thinking about supporting people, right? What are the circles of intimacy? Who's in your most intimate circle? Who are your friends and fall into that circle of friendship? Where do you participate? And sometimes there's a crossover between friendship and participation. And then these circles of exchange. And what we know often for people who experience disability is that the center of those circles, and it's not only true for those who experience disability. I think this can be true for a lot of people who are isolated in some way, shape, or form in their life, right? That there aren't very many people in those center circles, right? For some, it might only be 1 or 2 people and 1 or 2 friends. And then they may only do a couple of things in the community where they feel like they're participating and the people who are there. And finally, that circle of exchange is often filled with a lot of people. And for me, I often like to think about this from the perspective of the person and my own circle. And so one of the things I do in many of my hands-on workshops is actually make people go through this process and think about what these circles of exchange and participation, friendship, and intimacy look like for them. And you'd be surprised at the number of people in even those workshops that it looks very similar to this. I think one of the things that we forget is that the ways in which we get connected to people often start at the outside of the circle and then move inwards. So maybe there's a place where you met somebody in the community, be it at a coffee shop or whatever, and they invited you to go become part of a baseball team, right? So because you found out that you both like baseball, or that you go see a British football game or a soccer game at the local pub and want to participate there. But then you meet somebody and that level of friendship develops over time, and they may become, right, a partner. They may become somebody who is a very, very good friend, who feels like they're even more than a regular friendship, but a more intimate friendship. And so recognizing that all of these places give us opportunities to deepen relationship. And to be honest with you, I think that at the heart of good person-centered planning is relationships, and that we need to focus on that. So this set of circles was really started by the people at the Marcia Forest Center and at Inclusion Press. And then it kind of has been adopted or looked at by other people along the way. And so I'm utilizing this as an opportunity to sort of think about what is the evolution of the ways in which we think about people and planning for them, right? The Essential Lifestyles Planning actually looked at those same circles of intimacy out to exchange, but really putting the person at the middle, and then who are the family members that fall into each of those areas, closer and further away, paid supports or home supports, friendships and unpaid relationships, and relationships at school. So again, similar idea, but a different way of looking at it. And as I was putting this presentation together, for me personally, I think that what started to show up was that in learning more about Charting the Life course was that they were looking at mapping relationships as well, right? That this idea that we can look about people who care about us and care for us, what the role is that they serve, who's going to serve that going forward, and what might be the next steps to thinking about that. So again, a deeper dive into mapping those relationships, right? And it may even be just in our family, right? Thinking about those, who cares about us and who cares for us. How do I think about that from the perspectives of affection and self-esteem? This idea of reciprocity of knowledge, knowing things and sharing things with each other, who has a lifetime commitment to me, who provides day-to-day support, what material and financial support do people offer, who works towards me feeling included and being a member of my community, and then who can advocate for support. Like I said, I think each of these are just another way of thinking about this original idea of intimacy, friendship, participation, and exchange. And the more that we get explicit about who these people are, the easier it is for us to tap into the community resources available to us, whether those be in service land or they just be in the community at whole. And so if we think about this, essential lifestyles planning actually still continues today, right? They have a number of tools that I think really build on each other. And we've been utilizing those tools for quite a while in thinking about what good supports look like for people. And they, again, are pretty simple, and I'll be sure to share some resources at the end of this presentation. But this idea of important to and important for is a worksheet that we can think about, right? What's important to the person? What do we know, or what do supporters, or what do, individually do we know is important for us? So it might be important to me to have dessert after dinner every day, but it might be more important for me to think about a more healthy option than that, and really defining that. I know that's a really simple way of thinking about it, but this idea that what might be important for me might not be important to me, and how do we actually find the levels of support we need to make both things happen, right? And where are the hiccups along the way? This idea of what a good day looks like and what a bad day looks like for someone who's supported, or for ourselves, is a really good one. I will say that I've been doing some training again for Southwest Michigan Behavioral Health around an introduction to person-centered planning, where we actually utilize some of these tools still today to think about how we can build good lives for people. We can think about what we like and admire about somebody, and there are a number of ways to do that. I know that Essential Lifestyles Planning has a way to do that. My friends Aaron and Shelley actually created something called an asset portrait, which is another way to do that. We often like to do those things in groups of people, or to ask the same questions to a number of people, because we know that we're going to hear different things about who we are and what we have to contribute from others. The other thing about Essential Lifestyles Planning is many of those tools are really geared towards culminating in something called a one-page profile, something that I know has been sort of accepted and utilized across the sector for, I guess, really, to be honest with you, decades now, right? But it's also a way to really get at the heart of who the person is and what they have to offer, right? This idea of a one-page profile. So I often use this example of Ellie as a way to think about that. And this person kind of built on this simple idea of strengths, what works for me, what doesn't work for me, and then added things like, what am I working on? What do I love? And what is the vision statement for me? So this was someone, Ellie, who was going back into kindergarten, right? And I think that touching on each of these, if you read this particular slide, you get to see a snapshot at the core of who Ellie is, right? Visual learner, can count to 30. She doesn't like being rushed, and she doesn't like yelling or negative talk. She thinks that patience works for her, modeling stuff, schedules help, telling me when transitions are coming, and then things that she's working on. So what are the goals that happen, but also who she loves and who's important to her, right? And I think that this idea of telling what she really loves or appreciates in her life, right? Her parents, her brothers, Taco Bell, dancing, and rap music. I think all of us can imagine who Ellie is, and it really came out of utilizing some of these other tools, important to, important for, what would make a good day or a bad day, what do people like and admire about me, culminated in this one-page profile. The Essential Lifestyles Planning process, I actually think, offers a number of other tools outside of getting to know who the person is, where we can dive a little bit deeper, thinking about, in a particular instance, when we're supporting someone, what's working for them and what's not working for them, which is, again, often a conversation with the person and the people around them. This idea of 4+1 questions, right? Another way to shape this. And to be honest with you, person-centered planning tools are just ways to shape conversations for us to be able to understand and know people at their core. So, you know, this idea of what have we tried, what have we learned, what are we pleased about that we've learned, what are we concerned about that we've learned, and then to think about what we want to do next, are all really great ways to think about that framework. I will say honestly that there are literally, I think I was on the website for Helen Sanderson Associates last night. There's probably 14 or 15 different tools that people can use, and they're definitely worth looking into. It's also important to recognize that the learning community for person-centered planning hosts an annual conference, and that if people are really interested in becoming skilled facilitators in those modalities, that they do offer some trainings and certifications along the way for all of that. I've known about Essential Lifestyles Planning practically since the beginning of my career. I've never been trained in it, but because I've been trained as a good facilitator, I think I can utilize some of these tools. And next month's webinar in August, we'll be focusing on like facilitation skills and what are some things that we need to know where we can pull tools out of our toolbox and utilize them. So for Essential Lifestyles Planning, here are again a number of other resources, right? The Learning Community for Person-Centered Planning, Helen Sanderson and Associates, and to also recognize that there are numerous resources nationally and internationally available. I know that when I was looking up some of the tools, that literally there are states that have actually utilized Essential Lifestyles Planning and written publications to support people through the utilization of some of those tools, really to help direct and develop plans of service for people. Again, we talked about Beth Mount at the very beginning. She developed something called personal futures planning, has a number of resources available around what that could look like, including workbooks and how to work with direct support professionals to deepen their practice. And all of that, some of that is available at her own personal website, bethmount.org. For any of you who know Beth, she's also been this very creative, thinks that creativity plays a critical role in the ways that we need to think about supporting people, and has done a series of quilts over a number of years that really embody some of the concepts that she's been thinking about. So you get a chance to see some of her work there, but then also to recognize that Inclusion Press actually has a lot of her work and publications out there. For some of the other planning tools that I'm not going to really dive into today, there's David Petoniak. Those of you who have been in the field for a while know David had been focusing on he's now retired, but had been focusing on how do we support people who are particularly challenging. He also has a number of tools and publications that many of them that are just downloadable right from his own website. My friend Aaron Johannes in British Columbia has a website called Imagine a Circle, where they've been talking about and looking at different ways of planning and shifting some of that. Inclusion Press, as I mentioned earlier, not only do they have books around supporting MAPS and PATH and the facilitation of that work, but have some friends in San Diego who developed something called the Liberty Plan. My friends Beth and Kirk run a provider for people who are challenging called LifeWorks, and really integrating them into community. And then I also think that just tapping into what the Inclusion Press has to offer around resources for person-centered work. More and more, they're moving away from publishing and really looking at celebrating who's doing the work and how can we do it better and what resources can we offer up to people. But definitely resources worth looking into as you're thinking about and wanting to develop person-centered planning and person-centered tools. I just want to do a little bit of a shout out, because I think that one of the things that continues to emerge for me, both in thinking about my friends in Australia at Western Australian Individualized Services, but also Charting the Life course, is that they have taken what they have learned and continue to develop ways to think about the work and ways to make it accessible to their particular sector. Australia has really been thinking about what does good person-centered planning look like kind of from the beginning. Here you can actually see my friend Lee, who was one of the co-directors at WACE with both Beth Mount and John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien. They would regularly bring people from the US to help support some of that work, and then really looked at that work and then developed it into a set of tools. One of the things I really appreciate about, and I would recommend people checking out some of the resources they have, is that they have very much been focused on this idea of how do we provide training and develop materials that are accessible by self-advocates, and how do we make sure that they're focused on them and on Aboriginal populations. I don't know how well people can see, but in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that green shirt, even though there's an arrow, it's actually over top of my head. That's my friend Shelley and I, who met with a group of self-advocates that had been meeting regularly in Australia, and we were brought together to just sort of see what they were doing as far as work was concerned. And then we actually helped each of them create an asset portrait that I had pointed out earlier. So there's lots of ways that we can utilize each of these tools to help develop and support good lives for people. But I really, again, am really struck by the ways in which Lee and Susian and their colleagues have developed tools that are focusing on making sure that self-advocates or as I would like to say these days, just advocates have access to, and the ways in which they've looked at helping marginalized populations within the sector also make sure that they have access to those tools. So person-centered planning is, in many ways, it's person-centered thinking at the core, and then all kinds of different ways and tools to do. And like I said, I think we have plenty to learn from them about how do we embed that work, right? Thinking about, they have a number of these little quotes, life is better, and life is better when you have options. The other reason I would recommend looking into them is they partnered with a number of disability organizations in Western Australia and have, I didn't even think about adding this, but have a series of videos called The Lives We Lead that focuses on disability. And it doesn't just necessarily fall into the IDD world, but disability as a whole and the ways in which the communities have welcomed and are supporting people. If we have a little bit of time at the end, I may try and find one of those videos while we're looking at questions, but I just wanted to share that there are lots of ways to think about embedding this work into the work we do every day. And not only were they providing sort of some real hands-on supports for people to be advocates and self-advocates, but that they were a clearinghouse for resources and a think tank to help other organizations deepen their person-centered practices. I think at the core of the work that we do, I have to bring into the conversation my friend Judith Snow. I think that Judith, if we talk about the gifts that people bring, Judith was really the person at the core of that. For those of you who don't know Judith Snow, she was probably happened to end up at the center of what we now know as circles of support. Judith, I was lucky enough to buy and share a home with her for about 3 years when I lived in Toronto. And she was the master of recognizing what gifts people had to bring. But she had been in a nursing home because that was the only place that she could receive care for herself on the day-to-day. But she was also going to university full-time and got befriended by another friend of ours, Marcia Forrest. And basically, Marcia rescued her from the nursing home and took her home and started the first circle of support around her. And that rescue was really based on the idea that Marcia had developed a relationship with her, and that she knew that in many ways Judith was starting to give up and she needed someone to rally around her. And so this idea of person-centered work and person-centered planning has grown out of a commitment from people who are in relationship with people who are marginalized. And Judith, bringing Judith to the fore and her philosophy and understanding about the work has really been helping us recognize what gifts people have to bring. And so she's going to talk a little bit. This is a recording that was done. She was speaking during her Peace Through Inclusion tour, or World Peace Through Inclusion tour. She sort of made her way down through the United States to Georgia. And this particular recording takes place at a church where she's relating this idea of giftedness and how it relates not only to the scriptures, but to the work that we do.
I'm going to tell you another story to really capture this idea of what I mean by giftedness and what I think the scriptures mean. And this would fall under kind of the grounding idea, but also the hospitality idea, and also the networking idea of giftedness. I have a friend named Miriam. And Miriam asks a lot of questions. So how I met Miriam was that in 1993, a co-op started in the middle of Toronto, and the idea of the co-op was to be inclusive. And in 1 month, I think it was 56 of us moved into the co-op all at the same time. And we had never met each other. Now, in any urban context, if 56 strangers move into a building with 3 floors of apartments, the chances that they would actually meet each other are very small. Like you could literally live there for about 5 or 6 years without meeting all 56 people. You might meet 2 or 3 actually. So within 3 weeks, we all knew each other. How did that happen? Well, Miriam loves to walk into people's apartments without knocking. She loves to ask people very awkward questions, like, why is your nose so long? Or, you know, why do you wear that color? And then she goes into the next apartment without knocking and tells everybody what she just found out about the person in the previous apartment and asks them the same questions. So within, days, we were all talking to each other, if only to figure out what to do about Miriam, right? But this is the real story. The building that we moved into was originally developed for condos, but the developer had gone under and the city had bought the building and turned it into social housing. And along the way, to cut costs, they had changed the air circulation system. And we didn't know that. So when I moved into the building, very soon after I got there, I started to feel sick. Now, if it wasn't for Miriam, I would know that I felt sick. But because of Miriam, we knew that we felt sick. And we got onto it very quickly and discovered that what was happening was the air circulation system was picking up the car fumes from the car park that was underneath our building. So we were able to get the city to put in a modification to the air circulation, and only one person died. Not perhaps several people before we figured out what was going on. So in other words, Miriam saved a number of lives. Miriam turned us into a community, and Miriam gave us the power to be able to advocate for ourselves. That's a gift, according to the scriptural sense of giftedness, because she healed the community.
So this idea, right, of giftedness and what that might mean in the work that we do, I think has also been impactful in us being curious enough to think deeply about what does this person have to offer in community. I was fortunate enough, to know Judith and have been reflecting on that. I think it's about 5 years since she passed. But I also knew Miriam because Miriam became a good friend of Judith. She recognized that Miriam brought something to her, another perspective, another gift that she could learn from and develop over time. And Judith has played a pretty integral role in this development of person-centered planning, along with all of these other thinkers. Judith more as a philosopher than anything else, being able to think about that stuff. So what I think is most interesting around these planning tools and thinking about how we plan for people, and that I continue to learn more as I deepen my practice, is this idea of the Charting the Life course, right? In thinking about how they have taken some of the things we've learned, they've expanded upon them, they've thought more deeply about them, and really kind of embedded a number of practices that we were already talking about, right? Thinking about deeply about people, planning across the lifespan. All of these pieces are really integral to good person-centered planning. One of the things I really love about Charting the Life course as well is that it's not just focused, the tools are not just focused on supporting people who experience disability. They're not just focused even on people who are marginalized or traditionally, in our sense, marginalized, that there's a recognition that we plan for people across the lifespan, and that it's critical that we be thinking about the ways in which that happens. So remembering that it's not just about tools and it's not a program, right? It was designed for people with disabilities, but the reflection is something that I think many of us in the sector who started our careers in person-centered planning believed from the very beginning. I have been a huge proponent of person-centered planning because I've actually utilized the tools consistently across my own life, and how much that has impacted my ability to meet some of those goals and the thinking that I wanted in the course of my own life, right? Remembering that charting the life course is a trajectory, goes across the board, right? We think about the trajectory that people have. I think that this idea of life domains and life stages is incredibly helpful framework to be thinking about good person-centered planning, right? What is the daily life of people, including their employment? Where do they live in their communities? How are they healthy in their communities? What kind of safety and security do people need? Where are their social and spiritual outlets? And then where is the engagement and advocacy that actually happens for people? So all of these domains make up what would be a good life. And then to recognize that each of these domains is going to be impacted by the stage of life that we're in, right? If we think about prenatal and infancy as one place, early childhood, school age being another, transitioning to adulthood, we all know is a big transition, particularly for people we support, but it's true for all of us, right? It's pretty significant, those early teen years and then moving into our 20s and the way that shaped our lives and the kinds of support we had. Thinking about those domains across adulthood, right? What job do I want to have? Where do I want to live, right? What does healthy living look like to me? What am I putting in place? Where am I living that I feel safe? What hobbies do I have, or where do my spiritual needs get met? And then what kind of advocacy do I have to do for myself, and how can I be engaged to make a contribution to make sure that that's true for everyone else? And then I think one of the things that's really starting to happen in our sector, and I think in the world as a whole, is that the boomers are aging, and they need to be thinking about what does each of these things look like, right? And if we take these life domains and these life stages and think about them across the trajectory, which we're going to dive into a little bit more, but what is the vision now that I have for what I want and don't want, and how am I making sure each of these domains is actually being taken care of? I love the conversations that they've really brought to this idea that these circles are really not about a person being surrounded by services and family and community, but that we can think about the person and the family and the community as one whole, and ways in which services and other ways of thinking about being in the world can be incorporated. So thinking about the 3 buckets of support and how that's another way to have a conversation. What are the roles that we have with the people in context to our family and community? And how are those roles reciprocal, which I think has been missing from some of the ongoing conversations we have around supporting people, that not only are we in relationship with people, but that we actually contribute to each other's lives. I know I would never really provided personal support to my friend Judith, but I certainly did help her eat dinner if we were out having dinner together. But I also recognize that she brought a lot to my life, right? Me helping her eat dinner was nothing compared to the knowledge and the opportunities for relationship and communication with her that brought to mine, right? That we all have reciprocal roles in our lives. The other piece that I really like, and we'll dive into just a little bit today, is this idea of the integrated support star to a good life, and the ways we can think about the 5 different realms in the star and how those actually might help support us. I also really appreciate that there's a recognition that a person may have an idea about what their life looks like, but that also the family may have an idea. And this integration of recognizing that, particularly, up until adulthood, we are in the context of our families, and our family does make many of the decisions for us because we're still developing into, full and rich humans. But that at a certain point in time, the person actually gets to decide, right? We go back to that idea of person-centered thinking and person-centered planning. And what does the person want? And then how do we make sure that that happens in relationship to what the family wants? Recognizing that at the end of the day, family is always going to be there for the person. And we need to make sure that we're meeting the needs and the responsibilities and the desires of each of those groups, even though they may be different at times, which again, I think builds on some of the work around essential lifestyles planning as well. The integrated support star is, I think, a really lovely place to start to think about what are the supports that that people have, right? And what do they need? So thinking about what are the community-based supports that a person might have, and where they can make a contribution, and what might need to be in place, what might we need to be doing differently so that they're connected to their community. What are the technologies that people need access to in order to live rich and full lives? And we forget that this is also true for us in the sense like technology plays a huge role. I was talking about it today, thinking about, was talking to a family, or not a family, a direct support professional and their supervisor around the ways in which the team that they work for stays in connection with each other, right? And that we actually, traditionally, it used to be that you would come into a shift if you were working somewhere with someone who was supported, and you take a look at the log notes that people had left or the notes that people had made through the week, so you were kind of up to speed. But now technology plays a huge role in that particular instance. They're using WhatsApp as a way of communicating between all of the team members. And both the caregiver and their supervisor were talking about how they felt compelled to actually answer whatever was happening in the moment, recognizing that became an expectation of their own and not necessarily an expectation of the team. And so is there times when technology is offering too much? And how do we recognize that maybe in order for me to have a good life and to make sure that everything's integrated, I might have to set technology aside, but it's become such an integral part of what we do every day that we don't often think about the impact that it's having on our day-to-day relationships with each other. This personal strengths and assets, right, goes right back to Judith talking about giftedness. What do I bring to the table? Whether that be financial, physical, or intellectual with the work that I do. What relationships are important to me? What relationships do I bring? What is the reciprocity that lies within those? And then finally, this idea of what are the specific to eligibility? What are the services or things that I tap into that are eligibility specific, right? So there's lots of ways of thinking about that. So this one, I think, was from Central Michigan. It was from a presentation that I did with some people, from folks there around person-centered planning, right? And they were thinking about, how do I get a part-time job for somebody, right? Maybe it's clerical work, something that has routine tasks, and how do I find a supportive environment? So what were the things the person needed in the community or community-based? They needed a ride for transportation. They needed somebody to figure out how much they could work so that it didn't actually impact the funding that they were already receiving through SSI or SSDI. That really the technology that they probably would need would be a smartphone, because that's how everybody communicates these days. And if they were going to have a job, they needed to not only fit in, but to have access to that technology. What were the strengths that the person brought, right? They were friendly and outgoing, that they really like to do the day-to-day clerical things that often people find rather boring. They were good at utilizing and following a schedule. They really got along well with people. They definitely could read and follow simple instructions. So if it was structured in a way, then that they could be successful. And that they were good at asking for help, I think, is also a really great skill, right? Who are the relationships? Who could they look to help them find some of that work? Because most of us know We find our jobs through connections of people that we know more often than not. It's not often an ad, although we're finding that that's happening more and more these days, particularly in the work I'm doing in New Jersey, because we're so spread out. But that, you know, there was mom and I'm not even sure who Jane is, but I'm assuming a friend or a family member, that there's a teacher, that there was someone who actually was providing supports, was a staff person of theirs, might be a connection. There were people they knew that worked at a particular location, something called Meta Lodge, where they might be able to talk about it. And then some staff that the person knew would be some of the resources or relationships they might be able to tap into. And then what were the eligibility specific things that they could tap into, right? That there was community-based education programs for them. They could go to Michigan Rehab Services, which I believe has been renamed now, but that they could get some support to get some job coaching or figure out what that was going to look like. They lived somewhere where they could tap into Mid-Michigan Industries, again, to get some employment supports, that they were already connected to community mental health, and that they also had Social Security as part of the basis of what they were getting for what they needed. So as you can see, there's lots of ways to think about it. They can be big or small ways, right? One of my favorite tools is actually thinking about the life trajectory. And I think I have a special place in my heart for this because I think it relates so well to the two modalities of map and path that I had learned, right? Another way to frame the conversations about where has things been good or not so good in your life? Where do you want things where they're going to move forward? What's going to be good and not so good or you want to avoid? What's the big vision for what you do want and what do you want to avoid? So again, another framework that really taps into maps and path and this long-term vision, but it can also be used to plan something really short, like going on a diet, right? Like what would that look like for me? I just got back from my doctor and was told that I needed to lose some weight, that my sugar levels were a little high and I needed to reconsider that and what that might look like. And so I could do a trajectory, and actually I'm probably going to with some friends of mine to see what kinds of supports I might need. So when we're thinking about charting the life course, right, we recognize it was a series of tools to develop and assist in the planning for people across a lifespan, that it wasn't disability specific, although that's kind of the birth of it. It actually integrates a number of historic ideas and philosophies. I think that they provide a different way of thinking about a person's life that can be utilized to problem solve and to plan, whether it be big or small. I think that the other thing it does is it actually gives us a set of tools that are easily accessible. I didn't actually put this in there, but for those of you who know Charting the Life course, you know that you can go to their website and download any of the tools and start to facilitate those practices, but that they're just that more easily accessible. And because in Michigan, we're trying to really develop and deepen our appreciation for and the work with Charting the Life course, I think I wanted to make sure that we talked about that as a really good set of tools that we can tap into. And to be honest with you, that kind of brings us to the close of what tools are available and how to dive into them a little more deeply. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions.
Sheldon, I don't see any questions right now in the Q&A, but we'll give everyone a few minutes to type any questions that they have. And just a reminder that you will receive an email with the follow-up, a link to this recording. And then I'll also send out a follow-up email with a PDF of today's presentation and our link to our website, which we'll upload the videos to as well.
And Heather, I'll just say that I will make sure that I get that PowerPoint slide notes to you right after this webinar, so you have it right away to be able to send out. I know it was a little delayed in getting it to you last time, so thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, if and while people are actually thinking, I want to honor people's time, but I hope that you can all bear with me with another poem that I think is kind of resonating for me around how do we actually think about planning for ourselves or planning for others. And this poem, Start Close In by David White, I think kind of embodies some of that. And it kind of a bit of an introduction into us thinking about what good facilitation looks like next month. Start close in. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. Start with the ground you know, the pale ground beneath your feet, your own way to begin the conversation. Start with your own question. Give up on other people's questions. Don't let them smother something simple. To hear another's voice, to follow your own voice, wait until that voice becomes an intimate private ear that can really listen to another. Start right now. Take a small step you can call your own. Don't follow someone else's heroics. Be humble and focused. Start close in. Don't mistake that other for your own. Start close in. Don't take the second step or the third. Start with the first thing, close in, the step you don't want to take. I see there's a couple of questions. Thank you, Sonia, for the kind remarks. Rosalie, I am actually not currently, and I mean, I think I'm registered as an independent facilitator. I've certainly gone through that. I haven't actually been working with any community mental health agencies. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation about that. So you can see here is my contact information. And if I'm not available, I certainly know a number of other people in the state, and we'll reach out to, I think, a number of people who are actually on this call participating today who may be able to help with some of that as well. So feel free to reach out to me at sheldon@incompany-of-others.com, and we can go from there. Again, I'd like to thank you all for the hour of listening to me talk about person-centered planning. I hope that it's come across that I really am passionate about this work and believe that we all need to be doing more than just thinking about plans of service, but to be thinking about big lives for people and the ways in which we can support that to happen. So thank you all again.
And thank you, Sheldon. And we will see you back next month. And hopefully you all can join us as well.
See you all
Thank
next
you,
month. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Sorry about that. Thanks.